Hello, I'm Sue Blythe. I'm coordinator of We the World's Campaign for Environment, and welcome to the Gardens of Global Unity, where all things are possible. Today, we're growing a seed idea in the Garden of Environment. Have you heard? The world is warming. The tree of life is in danger. The sea levels are rising. In the next months and years, our human family needs to do whatever it will take to make the world work for all living things. That's 100% of humanity and the community of life on Earth. We're living a climate story that will be told for many generations to come. We the World is developing a program to engage all ages in climate action. The Climate Collaboratory is a pilot project of We the World and the University of Florida Extension. We shine a light on people who are already making a difference in important ways for the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. To prevent a climate calamity, we need to win all 17 global goals by 2030. Today, we're working on Goal 13, climate action. So let's meet our climate collaborator for today. Ellen Siegel is a climate activist who was a climate migrant who left Miami after 44 years, relocating to Gainesville, Florida, where she's taking classes in climate science and ecology. She wanted to be deeply knowledgeable about the science of global warming and teach how we can mitigate and adapt to climate change. As a climate reality leader, Ellen likes to quote the 1947 Girl Scout Handbook. A Girl Scout is ready to help out wherever she is needed. Willingness to serve is not enough. You must know how to do the job well, even in an emergency. Well, we've got a climate emergency that needs tending before it becomes a climate calamity. So welcome to the Climate Collaboratory, Ellen Siegel.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate the introduction. We are indeed in a climate emergency. And the challenge as a climate educator is to provide enough information to engage your intellect and your emotions, but not so much that you end up crawling under your covers with your blankie and your binky and disappearing from action. As Greta Thunberg likes to say, the antidote to despair, of which there is plenty in this conversation, is action. And so it's my pleasure to be a total volunteer in creating and delivering these programs. And it's my absolute delight and pleasure to do so. But if I were to pass the hat and ask the people listening today to put anything in that hat that I'm passing, my collection plate, if you will, it would be that as you listen, you connect with something that you learned today or that is reinforced for you today that you already knew, and that you make some decision on your own of how you will carry this conversation forward. One of the problems in the climate conversation is while 72% of Americans acknowledge climate change, and most of those acknowledge it's human caused, only about 27% ever talk about it. And so my goal in doing these programs is to have that conversation expand. And that is the absolute best thing you can do as a result of your investment of time and energy today. My program should last 45 minutes to an hour. And if there are questions that people would like to submit in the chat, that would be fine. Sue will be monitoring that if there's anything you want to ask. So without any more introduction, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at how carbon dioxide is heating the world. We're going to look at the impact of that heat on our ocean. We're going to look at Florida. This is a Florida-centric program, but much of it applies to anyone along the East Coast. We're going to look at our geology then and now. We're going to look at our probable business as usual future if we don't make the changes that Sue alluded to that must happen. we're going to look specifically at why does South Florida have a triple whammy challenge? Not just sea level rise, but why? What's Greenland got to do with it? What's the Antarctic ice sheet got to do with it? What is South Florida doing about it as a community, and what can we do collectively? A tip of my hat and great appreciation to Professor Hal Wanless, chair of the geology department at University of Miami, who has, I took his course and he has generously allowed permission for me to pretty much plunder his slide programs and his data. So thank you, Dr. Wanless. The first thing I'd like to orient all of us to is 800,000 years of geology. So I just want you to notice that the title is Carbon Dioxide Levels, 800,000 Years. BP is before present to the present. And I want to point out that the peaks and valleys, there are 8 of them, are about 100,000 years apart. So just take a moment and absorb what we're looking at. We've got hot, 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 hot. And when it's hot, it floods. When it's hot, it floods. When it's hot, it floods. When it's cold, there's ice ages. And in the last 800,000 years, there have been 8 hots and flooding and colds and ice. The last ice age was about 18,000 years ago. About 10,000 years ago, the climate, for some reason, stabilized. And that's what permitted civilization as we know it to flourish. I'd like you just to notice that the last time carbon dioxide levels were as high as they were was almost 3.5 million years ago. It's not on this chart. Some people say, well, how do we know that's what it is? Well, there are 3 ways that we know what the carbon dioxide level was in the atmosphere. We measure ice cores because there are gas bubbles trapped in the ice core. We measure tree cores and we measure lake sediments. So there's a lot of science behind this chart. In 2010, we were pushing almost 400 parts per million. If you think of a box of air, carbon dioxide is a very, very minuscule part of our atmosphere that we are breathing. Very, very small. Less than 4, it's about 0.4%. If you had a box of air in our 800,000 history, we never crossed the 300 parts per million number. And when I look sideways, it's because I have your chart on another screen. It's not that I'm ignoring you. In 2010, we were pushing 400. If you would like to take what we call a WAG, a wild ass guess, at what the parts per million were, I wonder if you would get that our parts per million were, go back, last month about 419 parts per million. Our danger line was crossed at 350 parts per million. At that level, things start to happen in on the planet's systems that get out of control. So I'd like to point out that we're here, and now I'd like to go to the next slide and show you that carbon dioxide is correlated very closely to temperature. So here, carbon dioxide is now in blue. So you'll notice it's really the same 800,000 years, and heat is red. And again, how do we measure heat? They go back and they have those 3 ways of measuring what the chemistry of things were, what the tree rings were, or what the gas bubbles are in the ice. I'd like to point something to you. I'd like you to notice that carbon dioxide levels have exceeded 400 parts per million, but the heat has not tracked it so closely yet. And that's what we're going to look at now. I want you to think about, well, why hasn't heat matched the carbon dioxide level? What's been going on? Well, first of all, let's look at where are the carbon dioxide, where is the pollution coming from? And it's carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide and HFCs and CHFCs. But this program today is focusing on carbon dioxide, which is the largest contributor at this time. And so if you notice what's going on here, it's life. We breathe out carbon dioxide, but it's also our industrial processes, use of fertilization, we're burning trees, we're burning our crops, we're producing oil, we're flying airplanes. So a lot of human activity is creating that. I'd like you to notice something about the rise in the carbon dioxide. So I was born here. I was born in 1949. I'm about to turn, whoa, come back. Sorry, it's a very sensitive clicker here. I was born about here. And when I was born, parts per million were at 310. This is post-World War II. And you'll notice that the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of our fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is shorthand: coal, oil, gas. Most of our power plants burn coal and gas. Most of the oil is burnt for heating and industry. So that accumulated pollution has been going up into our atmosphere. And here's a good place for me to point out the slide background that I use. This is Al Gore's slide background. Do you see this blue band on each of my slides? And this little rising sun? This is a picture of Earthrise the astronauts took from outer space. And that blue band is about 6 miles of somewhat breathable air, about 10 miles thick. And that is our troposphere that merges into the stratosphere. And that is all that keeps us safe from freezing to death. If we did not have this blanket of atmosphere, which is the teeny tiny part of carbon dioxide and some other greenhouse gases that keep us warm, we would be a frozen planet. We are treating this as if it were an open sewer with endless capacity to absorb the emissions from coal, oil, and gas, and that is the problem. So I'm going to show you next a graphic, and I want you to focus here. This is showing the Earth's heating up. Obviously, blue is cool, and yellow and orange is red. And I just want you to notice how it is changing over time since the Industrial Revolution. I'm now an elementary school kid, and now I'm in junior high school, and now I'm in college, and now I'm having my first job in my marriage, and now I'm opening my own business, and now I'm learning about this. And in 2017, I decided to change my life and become a climate educator. Look at my poor fevered planet. You remember that I asked you to think about that chart with the red and blue lines and notice that the carbon dioxide was skyrocketing, but the heat was not so much? This is where the heat is going. A little bit of it is absorbed by our Earth. Most of it is going into our ocean. So the ocean is absorbing, there are two numbers we're going to talk about. The ocean absorbing about 93% of the extra heat that the Earth and the atmosphere did not take in. And so that's the heat, but the ocean is also taking in carbon dioxide, which is not the topic of today's topic, but next week, we're going to talk about sinks and sources, and we'll talk about that. So now I would like you to look at a chart that takes us on sea level rise from 1970 to 2020. So the next chart is just that period of time. We noticed sea levels rising slowly since the 1880s. You can see that here. You're just kind of looking at the dark numbers. Don't get stuck in the statistical part of this chart. In 1930, we noticed that there was an 8-fold increase over the past 2,000 years of sea level rise. And about 1990, it's been very, very dramatic. Where does that sea level rise come from? Until 1990, 30 years ago, mostly it was because warm water gets bigger. And if you ever boiled eggs on the stove, you'll notice that the level of water gets higher in your pot as it gets hotter until it bubbles out. But recently, the ocean has been getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and the thermal expansion has increased the sea levels about 75% faster than the last 10 years as compared to previous years. this is part of the triple whammy for the entire coastal world. Every coast in the world is experiencing thermal expansion of their ocean. South Florida being no exception. So now I want to take you to Greenland. It's beautiful, isn't it? And perhaps some of the listeners have been to Greenland. It's just beautiful. Look at all that ice, miles and miles and miles of ice. Well, I'd like you to look at what's been happening. The ice in Greenland has been melting faster and faster, and it's melting faster and faster than what in 2002 scientists anticipated. Because when scientists first started looking seriously at the heating of our planet and the warming of the oceans, they figured the loss of Arctic ocean ice would not appear until the end of the century. We're already there and then some. You can see that the white part is what's left, and we are losing ice sheets at an extraordinary pace. And so this is kind of a graph, and now I want to show you a real life picture of where the ice line used to be. And this is where it is now. Lots and lots and lots of ice. The ice sheet is moving at about 10 to 20 miles per year. The melt is now going under ice sheets in an extreme, about 80 miles under the ice sheet. So this is Greenland. That's the North Pole, if you will. Here's Antarctica. And if this West Antarctic ice sheet shown in orange melts, sea level will rise about 25 feet. If all of Greenland melts, sea level will rise about 29 feet. We will be back to the flood zones that you saw in the chart about carbon dioxide and heat over the past 800,000 years. If this isn't an emergency, I don't know what is an emergency. So I want to talk to you about, well, what's going on? Why in 2002 didn't the scientists get it? Well, what's happening is, and I have kind of I try and personalize all this science to myself. When I grew up, we had a refrigerator with a freezer, and you had to defrost the freezer. And how you defrosted the freezer, and those of you of my generation, maybe a little younger, might remember this. My mom would take boiling water and she would pour it in the freezer and take like a spatula and wedge it under the ice that was covering the sides and the bottom and the top of the freezer. So what's happening is the warm water coming up from the tropics going into the North Atlantic is coming in under the ice sheets, and the warm air on top, because sometimes my mom would take a hairdryer and blow warm air on the top of the ice to melt it from above and below. And so that's what's happening. It's called a moulin. And when the heat on top melts the top ice, look at the rivers of water coming down, rivers and rivers and rivers of water coming down. And the rivers of water are actually going down through the ice. So instead of one massive block of ice, just like my mom breaking up the ice on the freezer, we're getting now chunks of ice which melt faster and fall into the ocean faster. So the ice sheets are fracturing. And there's one other thing that you want to notice about this. Here's fracturing from the top, but notice the color of the ice. Snow in winter should be falling and should be clean. When the top of the ice melts, soot from our Industrial Revolution, pollution from burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, volcanic ash that settled on the ice and got buried under the next year's level of snow is now exposed. And that is dark, and dark collects heat. So as the ice sheet melts, more dark ocean is exposed, collecting heat. As the top of it melts, more dark surface collects heat. And so you have what's called, in an odd way, positive feedback. It's a terrible phenomenon, but the ice sheets cause a spiral. The more the ice melts, the more dark there is, the more heat there is, the more the ice melts. And this is the catastrophe that our poles are facing. So I just wanted you to be aware of possible tipping point. A tipping point occurs when, even if we stop the heat right now, even if we never burnt another bit of coal, oil, or gas, the heat is now baked into our atmosphere. So some of this will continue, but we could slow it down, and there are ways to mitigate it and cool the planet. And I'm going to close this program with those hopeful kinds of things. So this is a slide talking about dark dust and soot on the surface accelerates the ice melt. My next picture is really to kind of keep you from going to sleep. So I'm going to pause it for a second. Here's Florida. I want to orient you to what you're looking at, and then I'm going to let it roll while I talk, because it's a very interesting graphic that NASA put together. Don't be off-put by the word thermohaline. Thermo means temperature, haline means salt. And this slide is designed to help you understand currents and what is keeping our planet from being very, very cold on the top and very, very hot in the middle. Because in fact, the range of planetary temperature is pretty comfortable for some sorts of life at all extremes, North and South Pole, and the tropics included. So there are 4 causes of sea level rise. The thermal expansion is one of them. And we're gonna, excuse me, I got ahead of myself. I want you to see this white line, the darker white line is taking heat from the tropics, from the equator, and moving it all the way up into Greenland, and it reaches Europe, which keeps Europe from being frozen. I mean, it gets cold, but Europe is not freezing because they're benefiting from, we call it the Gulf Stream. It's also called something called AMOC. Don't worry about that. The Gulf Stream transfers warm water, because warm goes to cold. So the warm water is pulled towards the cold. And then the dotted light line is what's supposed to happen. And what has happened until now is the warm water gets colder and colder, and cold water will sink. And it will sink very, very deep. And so these are the cold water currents that are transferring cool water back to the tropics. And so now I'm going to let the globe spin. Just wanted you to see the Gulf Stream and the cold water coming south while I talk. So spin away, dear planet Earth, spin away. So we have melting ice from the north. The north is coming, adding itself to the Atlantic Ocean. And it's cold when it melts. Because it's cold, it slows down the Gulf Stream. Follow my thought. We have thermal expansion, rising sea levels everywhere. We have melting ice from the north coming south. So the east coast of Canada and the US are getting more water, just higher levels of water. The Gulf Stream is slowing down because the temperature difference that pulls it north is less. So it's going slower. Now, think about the Bahamas. If you have been to the Bahamas, you may or might not have noticed that their sea level is 3 feet higher, a whole meter higher than Florida's sea level. Why? Because the Earth is spinning, and the spin is causing the water, like you were spinning a bucket of water. The Earth is spinning, and that water is being pushed over to the Bahamas. The Gulf Stream keeps it going that way. When you slow the Gulf Stream, which is a northbound current, when it slows down, that water in the Bahamas sloshes back to Florida. And it impacts South Florida the most because the Gulf Stream is right next to South Florida until about Jupiter. And then it swings out into the Atlantic Ocean. So ice melts have been increasing since 1992. Fresh water has been pouring into the ocean because of the melting Greenland ice sheet. The Gulf Stream is slowing down now, causing more water to slosh over to South Florida. And so South Florida gets the extra, on top of thermal expansion, they get extra water, and they get sloshing back water. And then the last thing I want to talk to you about, the last whammy, impacting the East Coast more than anywhere else on Earth, is something you're not reading about in your newspaper. And this is thanks to Dr. Hal Wanless. It's the gravitational pull of the huge ice masses. The Greenland ice masses are so vast that they actually have gravity, the way the moon has gravity on our oceans and causes tides. The ice masses of Greenland are so vast that they actually gravitationally pull some of the sea level up to them. As they get smaller and smaller, that gravitational pull is weaker and weaker. And so the seawater that was already in the ocean, but pulled up on the ice mass, is sliding down. As the ice shrinks, the sea now flows south instead of towards the ice mountains. And Florida is so flat that the extra ocean water, on top of the ice melt, on top of the slosh of water back from the Bahamas, on top of thermal expansion, creates even more sea level rise than we can possibly imagine. So if you live in South Florida, go read sealevelrise.org. You want to know what's coming so you can make your own personal plans. So just another, doom and gloom and horrible statistic. Back in 2012, a climatologist said, with the Earth at the state of carbon dioxide in 2012, if that were to continue, sea levels would be 70 feet higher than they are now. And you can see that thank heavens I'm in Gainesville. And that's one of the reasons I selected Gainesville. I wanted to be a little higher than what sea level would be. 70 feet of sea level, I might be oceanfront property. And it may take a while, maybe not my lifetime, but the water will come, it's here. So I'd like to take a look now at Florida through time to show you that this is not unusual. 120,000 years ago, we were in one of those warming stages, and Florida was this big. I mean, the landmass was this big, and this was the outline, and half the water came from Greenland and half the water came from Antarctica. That they had melted. And so, we were 18 feet higher of water level. And then 18,000 years ago, remember I mentioned our last ice age was 18,000 years ago. So 18,000 years ago, Florida was quite wide, very wide. And here we are from 10,000 years ago. Sea level has risen, has come in 100 miles, and here we are. So that's kind of Florida through time. We've been here, we've been here, we're heading to here, we're not here, and here's where we are today, but here's where A was. This is what we're looking at, potentially. This is a satellite image of South Florida today. Red is agriculture, blue is water, white is all the development in South Florida. This TP is Turkey Point, a nuclear power plant. I don't know if we have any South Floridians on this program today. If you are, you want to kind of keep your eye on what happens to Turkey Point. This is Cape Sable on the West Coast. I'm sorry, here's Cape Sable, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten what CR is. We're moving towards Naples here. We're going to do an image of what South Florida will look like in 2060, business as usual. We're going to have 5 to 8 feet of additional sea level rise with saltwater intrusion. So there will be a freshwater problem for the city. Turkey Point will be inundated. Cape Sable is is gone. The Keys are gone. How bad might it be and when? People always want to know, well, when should I sell my house? When should I move? There's no exact timetable on it. We need to do everything we can to stop this. But in the last 10 years, the speed at which sea level in Florida is rising has increased as much as 1 inch every 3 years. And you can see that sea level rose, took 31 years to go here and 15 years to go here. It is an emergency. This is, again, South Florida centric. Here's the nuclear power plant. Here's Miami International Airport. Broward County today. This is, well, actually 2011. And we're going to look at some computer models of what could happen at 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot of sea level rise. So you just want to anchor on, when I was learning all this, I anchored on Turkey Point because I had Fukushima in my head and I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I don't want a storm surge and failure of all the backup systems to happen at Turkey Point and irradiate all of South Florida. I don't particularly want Miami International Airport to go underwater either, but Miami International Airport is built on fill. Okay, so let's go. This is a little depressing, so let me go through it quickly. We've got images at mean high water between 2030 and 2042, and Turkey Point is going, and Turkey Point is pretty much gone. And yeah, we're at 2084. We'll all be dead who's watching this. By the end of the century, at 10-foot sea level rise, Miami has become more or less like the Keys. So let me just summarize, and then we'll move on to something a little more cheerful. We have ice melt. Sorry about that little beat. We have the slowing Gulf Stream. We have reducing gravitational pull on the sea. Thank you for hanging in with me. It is hard to breathe when you understand what the future may bring, what it's likely to bring. Our probable and almost certain future under business as usual is what we've looked at. So breathe. Let's dial it back. Let's shift gears. Let's look at what is being done and what we can do. Our governments have finally dialed it in. I will provide these links, hard copy, to Sue, our coordinator. And Sue, you'll figure out how people can get to them, or if you're watching this, you can take a screenshot of these links. I've put up websites for Dade County and Broward County who are actively engaged in, we'll talk about this in a minute, mitigation and adaptation. So government is clicking in, at least at the South Florida level. This is not a political conversation, but Florida needs to be doing many, many things it is not doing, as does the United States need to be doing many, many things we're not doing. But there is governmental attention and hope. So I do want to share a vision with you. This is a 2.5-minute clip from a film called 2040. And lots of places in the world are actually doing something locally. So be inspired.
My name is Damon, and this is my daughter, Velva. Her major concern right now is the elusive art of sleep direction. But soon, she'll have to face a rapidly deteriorating environment.
The ice sheet is now melting faster than the scientists predicted.
I think there's room for a different story, a story that focuses on the solutions to some of these problems. So in 2040, what will the world look like for our daughter if we just embrace the best that already exists?
Instead of having governments that are reacting to disaster, we need governments and businesses that actually take us off in a different direction.
It's farming, or it could be energy, it could be housing, or it could be powering girls.
I'd like to see deforestation being stopped. Oh, that would be so cool. That'd be awesome.
Just be respectful to Earth.
Imagine, Velva, if we've adopted regenerative practices like phrases,
pulling the carbon in the soil and making it healthier.
That's right, yeah.
and we embrace efficient local energy.
Bangladesh has 5 million solar home systems. They have that power in their own hands. This is bringing people together.
But here I am seeing an aeroplane that is spewing out carbon. You can't help but be a hypocrite because our entire system is built on fossil fuels.
What were you guys thinking?
Well, sometimes we weren't.
Innovation, imagination, creativity. This is within all people.
People want to be working on something that they can see is actually helping to regenerate the world.
Everywhere you look, you see incredible reasons for hope.
You could feed 10 billion people with the protein from marine permaculture alone. Wow.
Not only are there so many people who want to take part in telling a new story, we have everything we need right now to make it happen. What's your 2040?
I just want the future to be good.
That's a film about what is actually being done in different cities around the world. And the filmmaker went around the world and shows you how that works. And now I'm going to take 8 minutes. I am so excited about this video. I learned about this video in my class at University of Florida. This is Saul Griffiths. He's a data geek. He's authored Rewiring America. They have a website. You can subscribe for free and keep up with him. In the interest of time, I have shortened his 20-minute video to show what we could do right this minute to freeze our use of oil, coal, and gas, go totally to renewables, and best of all, not need to lower our lifestyle use of electricity. All it takes is an effort akin to what we did in World War II. We've done it before, we can do it again. So listen carefully.
But there are people who have thought about what it might look like to decarbonize by 2050. And to understand that, it helps to get a picture of where America's energy comes from and where it goes.
Sorry, my son nearly stepped on a snake. Do you want to say hi?
This is Saul Griffith. He's a physicist and an engineer, but this is how Dave describes him.
Probably the person who knows more about energy as it's used in the United States than any other human being.
A few years ago, Saul decided to make a model of America's energy use. He ended up reading basically every available piece of data from
The Energy Information Administration, Department of Transportation, National Highway Transit Authority, the Census Bureau of Labor Statistics, and NOAA. And so we pull all of those together to build a very comprehensive picture of the US energy economy.
That picture of the US energy economy, it looks like this.
If you're just looking at the whole thing at once, it just looks like a big pile of spaghetti. It's hard to make sense of, but it just traces energy, every unit of energy. How does it enter the economy? How is it used throughout the economy?
This kind of chart is called a Sankey diagram, and it's easier to understand in 3 sections. These columns here on the left are the sources of all the energy used in the US, like natural gas, coal, solar, wind, nuclear, and oil. This column in the middle is what those energy sources get converted into. So a lot of it becomes electricity. Most oil becomes the fuel we use for transportation. And here you can see how much natural gas energy is being used to generate electricity versus being used directly to power things like cooking stoves. And over here on the right, this is where all the energy is used, broken down into incredible detail, like how much energy is being used to light shopping malls in the US, or how much energy is being used by vehicles driven for work.
So you start to get this incredibly detailed picture of all of the interconnections, which is really, really important when you do the next exercise. But what happens if we decarbonize?
Remember that carbon emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels, this stuff. And Saul says that means that to decarbonize, we just need to follow their path. The first place that leads you is here, with electricity and the energy we use to generate it, the majority of which in the US comes from 2 kinds of fossil fuel, natural gas and coal. If the US wants to decarbonize, it needs to stop getting electricity this way and to replace it with other decarbonized energy sources. That means coal power plants, gone. Gas power plants, gone. All electricity would come from renewable sources: wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric and biomass, or nuclear energy. Decarbonizing the way we get electricity would be a huge investment, but it would also only eliminate 20% of emissions. And that's because electricity and energy are not exactly the same thing.
That doesn't solve the vehicle's emissions. It doesn't solve your heating emissions from using natural gas or fuel oil in your basement.
All these other parts of the economy draw their energy directly from fossil fuels. Like transportation, we use oil for fuel, and commercial and residential buildings where we use gas and oil for heat. But Saul says there is a kind of elegant solution to this. You decarbonize these sectors by switching their energy source from here to here. Make all of it electric. because we already have almost all the technology we need to do it.
Heat pumps, batteries, electric vehicles, wind turbines, nuclear power plants, is we know that that can work. We know we can do electric cars. We know we can do electric heat for nearly everything.
It's all in the end just about machines, right? We got a bunch of machines that use fossil fuel energy. We need to replace them with machines that use clean electricity. And so it really just comes down to a matter of industrial capacity. How fast can you build machines?
There are some things we'd have a harder time decarbonizing. Air travel will rely on fossil fuels until alternative technologies get better. And things like steel and concrete are really hard to manufacture without fossil fuels. But if we decarbonized as much as possible with the technology that we have now, it would end most of the US's carbon emissions. This chart shows the country's carbon emissions broken down by economic sector. If electricity, residential, commercial, and transportation were mostly decarbonized, you'd have solved a lot of the problem. All of this would be a huge undertaking, and it needs to happen fast. Sol's research modeled different scenarios for the transition from fossil fuel-based machines to electric ones, from a market-driven transition to carbon taxes, to a much more direct and heavy-handed approach that would replace our machines with their electric counterparts very quickly. And he found that because we've delayed action for so long, none of these slower approaches will be enough.
If you went back to 2000 and started then, you could just put like a modest carbon tax in place and it would have just eased us down over the course of 30 years or whatever. But emissions kept rising and rising and rising. So now to get where we need to go, they gotta fall off a cliff, and that means zero delay. We're just talking about a level of industrial mobilization that none of us alive have seen. It would look like what FDR did to prepare the US for war. Literally every single solitary fossil fuel machine that goes out of service is replaced by a clean energy alternative. Every furnace, car, factory, name it.
Nearly everyone is buying an electric vehicle. Nearly everyone is buying rooftop solar. Nearly every new power plant that comes online is industrial scale solar or industrial wind. We need that level of effort to do a lot better than 2 degrees.
All of recorded human history has happened within an era of relative climate stability, an era that's about to end. But we still have control over what comes next. And the global effort that'll require hinges in part on what the US decides to do. America can decarbonize. We have the technology to do it. We have the resources. The only question is whether we want to do it.
I have a 6-year-old and 11-year-old, and I have to believe that's going to happen. Otherwise, I have to try to make that happen as long as possible, because it's their future we're stealing by not doing it.
So it's totally in line with We the World and Gardens of Global Unity, totally in line. So we have a choice of making a progressive, orderly process where we can do planning and help affected families, businesses, communities clean our land before it goes under, or we can risk catastrophic chaos, creation of large numbers of dislocated, very poor people, polluted wetland and marine environments. So let's see. There's lots we can do about climate change. Just to give you some of the vocabulary, there's mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And we're going to speed walk through those in the interest of time, but to give you an idea of how to think about what you can do. So mitigation will reduce the amount of emissions. Adaptation will reduce the harmful impacts of the climate change. And resilience means the ability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from that. And you hear resilience a lot in South Florida or Texas or Louisiana about resilience after hurricanes. So mitigation is essential because the higher global temperatures rise, the greater the adverse consequences that we're looking at. If emissions are unchecked, we have a greater danger of very abrupt climate change or surpassing those tipping points where the ice caps melt, for example, or the Amazon no longer absorbs carbon, but now starts emitting carbon. And the collapse of the ice sheet in West Antarctica could lead to very rapid sea level rise. Melting of permafrost in the Arctic region could lead to large releases of methane, which we didn't even talk about, but it's specifically 25 times more powerful of a heat trapper over a 12-year period than carbon dioxide is. Heat levels in the Middle East, if we do business as usual, may exceed a body's survival to live unless greenhouse gases are reduced very quickly. So there are a lot of mitigation strategies that are feasible, that are cost effective, that reduce these fossil fuel emissions. And you can see those there. Many of them you can do. I myself have joined a carbon offset program. So when I fly, I have a boyfriend in Canada. When I fly to Canada, I offset my carbon emissions from that travel by buying water purification wells in Africa or planting more trees. I walk and bike wherever I can. My next vehicle will be an electric vehicle. I'm as vegetarian as I can tolerate. So there are things that you can do too. Adaptation reduces the impacts of climate change. And so a white roof, if everybody in the world painted their roofs white, it would replace a lot of the reflectivity that we've lost on the ice sheets. Planting trees, easy to do. Replacing your air conditioner with an HVAC system. Cities can build seawalls and replant wetlands, and strategic retreat, of which I am a living example. I did a planned strategic retreat from my home of 44 years and all my friends and my religious community and my school at that time, University of Miami, because I could see the writing on the wall and I wanted to be able to focus on doing something about it. But strategic retreat can also be done on a city and statewide level. So the choice is ours. We have everything we need to make it happen right now. And my question to you is, what will you do? What struck you in this talk? How are you feeling? What is your balance between despair, denial, hope? And what tiny change for yourself will you commit to right now to carry the conversation forward? And with that, I thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate that. And I pray that this has helped you take some steps towards cooling our fevered planet. And thank you, Sue Blythe, for organizing this program.
Thank you, Ellen Siegel, for all you have learned in your quest to become a climate educator and to presenting it so powerfully and clearly. So my part in the Climate Collaboratory is to help tell this story, not only from individuals like you who are making changes in your personal life, are working at the organizational level and the legislative level to help make the changes that need to happen. And we are telling the story of the human family that will be told for many, many generations to come. And we want them to know that we're doing what we can. We are amplifying the voices of people like you, and we can do this. And that's the message I want to give the children. Let's do it.
Yes,
and by the way, let's have some fun doing it.
And
right?
us elders with the youngsters is a powerful combination.
Absolutely.
So the program is a great model for other communities to take on.
Well, we are doing a pilot program in Alachua County, Florida, where you have moved in your climate retreat. And so we feel like the story that we tell here is indeed a model for people anywhere and everywhere. So we're going to see what we can do in this next year and in the years to come. So thank you so much, Ellen Siegel, for being with us today. And we look forward to growing this seed idea in the gardens of global unity.
See you next week for carbon sinks and sources and how whale poop can save the world.
Oh, yay. Let's find out. Okay. Thank you, Ellen. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.